Here is a series of random clips from the Ghost Stories English dub.
Have you accepted Jesus as your personal savior?
I don't care about your cat, he's probably dead.
Shut up! Drew, what are you, retarded?
Hello everyone, I'm Finn. Welcome back to Finn Films. Join me today as we discussed the most unhinged English anime dub ever, Ghost Stories. Ghost Stories might just be one of the most infamous anime of all time. This is largely due to the hilariously crash and absolutely wild English dub.
Shut up! Who you calling a dog?
It's extremely likely that if you are clicking on this video right now, you are at least somewhat aware of the Ghost Stories English dub. I mean, I don't know any other anime that's over 20 years old that's been clipped and reacted to more than the English dub of Ghost Stories. But if somehow you have never heard of Ghost Stories and have no idea what I'm talking about, and the first few seconds of this video were insane to you, here's a little quick history lesson. The Ghost Stories anime was originally adapted from a children's book series written by Toru Tsunemitsu, the book series titled Ghost Stories at School, which is about, well, ghost stories at school. The anime follows our main character, a middle school girl named Satsuke and her little brother, who have recently moved to the hometown of their deceased mother. The primary plot of the story revolving around these two siblings, as well as their fellow classmates Hajime, Momoko, and Leo, as they encounter strange ghosts, demons, and entities based off of Shintoism as well as Japanese folklore, plaguing their middle school. The manga would debut to pretty positive success, and just a few years shortly after its release, it would be adapted into a 4-part film live-action series, as well as a video game. The famous anime produced by Studio Pierrot in Aniplex would debut in 2000. At this point, Ghost Stories, both the anime and the manga it was adapted from, were just a relatively pretty popular kids series, the anime even bringing in higher ratings than Pokemon and Doraemon at the time in Japan. With this solid foundation for success, the folks over at Fuji TV, the company which had the rights of distribution to Ghost Stories, decided that they wanted to bring the anime to a Western audience, approaching distribution company ADV Films to make the Western adaptation and do the localization. If you didn't know, whenever an anime is being made into an English dub, it goes through a process that's known as localization. Localization just being a process which is basically adapting a piece of media to a new targeted audience, in this case adapting an anime from Japan to a Western target audience of the United States. In anime, historically the most common form that localization takes place in is possibly censoring certain scenes or possibly certain characters and changing them to fit American film and TV regulations, as well as changing jokes or references to things that possibly an American audience wouldn't get. Most of the time this is references to certain aspects of Japanese culture, changing them to things that we in America would be much more familiar with. This is famously how rice balls, onigiri, became donuts in any anime ever that was made by 4 kids in the mid to late 2000s.
These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite! Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut!
The localization and adaptation for the anime Ghost Stories, though, somehow turned a fun ghost hunting kids show, almost akin to Scooby-Doo, into something more like South Park. So what the f*** happened? You see, unlike most anime that goes through this localization process for a Western audience, Fuji TV gave ADV Films an unprecedented amount of control over the localization process. Essentially, there was only a couple of rules that ADV had to follow, and as long as they did that, they basically had the green light to do whatever they wanted with this anime. The only rules that Fuji TV gave them were 1, don't change the characters' names. This includes the names of the ghosts. 2, don't change the way the ghosts are slain, as these are all references to Japanese folklore and many things in Shintoism. And finally, don't change the core meaning of each episode. Enter into our story infamous writer and anime adapter, Stephen Foster. Foster is kind of notorious among many in the anime community. That's because he has kind of developed a reputation for making really significant changes to storylines and dialogues when, well, he didn't like the original source material. And wow, did he not like the original script for the Japanese version of Ghost Stories, and apparently he wasn't alone either. For some reason, the staff and voice actors at ADV Films came to believe that this original Japanese script was so bad that it wasn't worth saving at all, and that a rewrite was desperately needed in order for this show to be saleable to Western American audiences. Voice actor Greg Aris, don't know how to pronounce that name, who voiced Leo, recounted in 2007 that the original anime was a turd of a show, and that the Japanese distributors Fuji TV told ADV, look, this really didn't go well on TV. You may have to work with this show a little bit. Similarly, voice actress Monica Rial, who voiced Momoko in the American dub, stated at Anime USA 2011 that Ghost Stories did not do very well in Japan, and that Animax told them, we don't care what you do, we just need to recoup some of the money we lost on this show. Have fun. As such, Foster and the other writers essentially let the voice actors have free reign over the Ghost Stories English script, allowing the talent to ad-lib scenes essentially whenever they wanted. According to Foster, whoever showed up to the recording studio first for any given episode could improvise anything they wanted. Those that came later had to then build upon the tone and the jokes that were established earlier.
It was, putting it nicely, a turd of a show. Even the Japanese, when they licensed it, told ADV, look, this didn't do well on TV. You may have to work with this show a little bit. And they asked, what can we do? And they're like, you can do whatever you think will make this show sell.
This basically caused like a game of one-upmanship between the voice actors of this show, each of them trying to outdo the other with whatever crazy jokes, ideas, or comments that they could come up with in the time, which is how we get absolutely insane lines in the English dub, like this one.
What? Ketero, what are you, retarded?
Watching the Ghost Stories dub is like living in a fever dream. It's almost impossible for me to believe, even now after I've watched this anime multiple times, that this was an official English dub localization, as it feels more like something we'd see on YouTube, like a comedic fan dub or an abridged series. Outside of the wild, crass, South Park-like shocking humor, the main changes to the script, to the story of Ghost Stories, really take form in how the characters themselves are changed. Hajime, Satsuke's neighbor, has been turned into a tropey, Master Roshi-like uber-horny character.
You open that window again and I'm gonna push you out of it.
If I were you, I wouldn't wear horizontal stripes like that. Makes your butt look big.
Kichiro, Satsuki's first-grade brother, has been turned into a whining, sniveling little child who spends most of the episodes making incoherent sounds.
I believe his size is increasing in direct proportion to a rising level of fear.
Leo is portrayed as the nerdy expert on ghosts and paranormal phenomenon. This is similar to the Japanese sub, except now, in the English dub, he's Jewish.
No, I'm Jewish.
That's a yikes for me, my dude.
And finally, and easily my favorite of the changes made by the localization team, we have Momoko, an older girl who has the ability to see spirits because, well, she's an insane born-again Christian who spends most episodes trying to convert her friends.
Such brave, strong, handsome men. Have you accepted Jesus as your personal savior?
Again, these voice actors, along with Stephen Foster himself, went absolutely mental in the adaptation of this show. To describe most of the humor in Ghost Stories as like just pure shock value is really putting it lightly. The voice actors basically took any opportunity they could to make raunchy jokes, to ad-lib scenes, to add all sorts of fourth wall breaks and weird like cultural references at the time to the early 2000s. Basically any scene that doesn't actually show a character's lips moving was basically free game for these voice actors to make some absolutely wild jokes. And I'm gonna be 100% honest, it's pretty hilarious. Don't get me wrong, it is straight up just shock humor, similar into the same veins as something like South Park. If you are someone who is easily offended, do yourself a favor, don't watch this English dub, as it's likely to give you an aneurysm. Anything goes when it comes to the humor in the English dub of Ghost Stories. They make fun of anything that you can think of, from religion to politics and everything else in between.
When I volunteered at the wonderful Exodus homosexual conversion camp, I met this woman who was there who looked a lot like that lesbian, woman.
Like, it's pretty safe to say that there will never ever be another English official dub like Ghost Stories ever made again. I mean, this dub would never fly in 2024, and the fact that it even got cleared to air in the mid-2000s is like absolutely insane to me. Now, what's really interesting to me is like how the folks over at ADV basically like rewrote the entire history of Ghost Stories in Japan. As I said earlier, multiple voice actors as well as Foster himself have gone on the record saying that like the original Japanese dub was so horrible, and that Fuji TV themselves said that they needed to recoup the money they lost on this show in Japan. Hence, according to them, why they let Foster and the voice actors have basically free reign over this English dub. However, the problem is, that's not entirely true. As I stated earlier in this video, certain episodes of the Japanese sub of Ghost Stories even had higher viewing numbers than anime like Pokemon and Doraemon. Remember, this is in the early 2000s when arguably Pokemon was at its peak as well. That to me doesn't sound like a show that was desperate to recoup money. This portrayal of the original Ghost Stories anime being a like kind of major flop seems to primarily come from Stephen Foster himself, as in his own words, he enjoys f***ing up things that he believes kinda sucks. I would also venture to guess that a lot of like the themes in this show, specifically the references to like ghost stories and folklore, were probably completely lost on the English voice actors as well as Foster. For example, in episode 2 of Ghost Stories, the kids investigate a ghost that seemingly is haunting the toilets of their middle school. As we see early in the episode, a ghost hand emerging from this Japanese toilet, pulling an unsuspecting victim down within it. Now, at first glance, if you didn't know any better, this seems like a absolutely hilarious, ridiculous, just premise for an episode of an anime. Without any context whatsoever, it just seems absolutely absurd, and it makes you wonder, like, okay, how is this show not a comedy? But you see, this is actually based on a variety of myths, legend, and folk tales in Japanese culture. 3 of them, actually, if we want to get specific. The first being Hanako-san, a Japanese urban legend about the spirit of a young girl named Hanako, who apparently haunts school toilets. The legend varies depending on like what version that is being told, but all of them essentially boil down to like the same thing. A young girl named Hanako had a traumatic death in a school bathroom, and now she seemingly haunts them forever. The second folktale reference is that of Akamanto. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Also known as the Red Cape. Akamanto is a Japanese urban legend and folktale about a masked spirit who wears a red cloak that is said to appear to people using public toilets. The spirit asking the person to choose between either red paper or blue paper, with either choice basically ending up in the person's untimely death. So if you ever were to encounter this spirit in a Japanese toilet, your only option is to really run. Finally, and probably my favorite, we have the classic spectral hand in the toilet meme. If you've played Legend of Zelda, you might be familiar with this one. Do you remember that weird hand that appears in the bathroom in Majora's Mask? Well, this is actually a reference to a series of Japanese folktales and ghost stories, all referencing a hand that emerges from a traditional Japanese squatty potty, and then it tries to play a little game of grab ass when you're taking a dump. Obviously, if you are someone who is completely unaware of any of these like Japanese folktales and ghost stories, and then you were to watch the second episode of the Japanese sub of the Ghost Stories anime, you're gonna think that this is the funniest, weirdest shit ever. And to me, it seems very obvious that Stephen Foster and the English voice actors for Ghost Stories very much thought this. With all of this context, then, I'm not too surprised that, like, a lot of these themes and references within Ghost Stories, references to the folk stories about the ghosts themselves, would be completely lost on Foster and all of these American English voice actors. You combine this with the fact that Foster very much seems like a person who enjoys pissing people off, as well as a person who enjoys messing with scripts for the hell of it, as well when you add in the context that the English dub was made in 2005 at really kind of the height of like crass animated humor like South Park and Family Guy, and how we got to this ludicrous English dub of Ghost Stories, begins to make a lot of sense. Now, of course, there is something a little bit weird and kind of off-putting about the fact that Foster pushes this narrative that Ghost Stories was like a complete failure as a children's anime in Japan, and that he needed to come in and save this anime, when it's very clearly obvious that he had, you know, little respect, if any, for the original source material. That being said, though, I still have to say that Ghost Stories is probably the best English dub ever made. I mean, the voice acting industry has come like a long, long way since the mid-2000s when this show was originally adapted. Voice acting kind of for a long time was viewed as, like, for many actors and actresses as kind of a way just to make ends meet, with many of their ultimate goals being to be like an on-screen talent for TVs, movies, or whatnot. Voice acting now, though, is a much more respected and higher quality craft. The English dubs of most like modern anime are like a million times better than the English dubs of anime from my childhood. That being said, though, still like 99% of the time, I personally will opt to watch a anime in the native Japanese, as for whatever reason, a lot of like the character tropes and themes of anime just don't translate 100% to like English voice acting, and a lot of times the English dubs, even now, can just feel a little cringe. Ghost Stories, though, is like a whole nother beast entirely. The English dub is so outlandish, so insane, that to even call it an English adaptation is like, just feels wrong. It is a completely different show in its entirety, a completely different show altogether, full stop, albeit an absolute hilarious one, if you can get over just how absolutely insane and absurd it is. I think it's pretty safe to say that there's never going to be another English dub like the Ghost Stories English dub outside of like fan dubs and abridged comedies that you will see on YouTube. And it is this reason specifically why Ghost Stories has kind of garnered such a cult fan base online. Whether you like the English dub of Ghost Stories or not, I think we can all agree that Ghost Stories is by far the most unhinged English anime dub of all time. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, learned something new, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to help support me and to put the video into the algorithm. If you did enjoy this video, then why don't you check out some of our other anime content and live-action anime content on screen now. As always, guys, thank you again for continuing to support me. I hope you stay safe out there, drink your water, hug your mother. Until next time, peace, love, aru.